The Guest House by Jalaluddin Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Over the past couple of decades, I've been a regular attendee at 6 different Unitarian Universalist congregations. At a guess, I'd say I have been to nearly 400 UU Sunday services, and while I have enjoyed nearly every one of those services, about a dozen stand out as being really exceptional in some way. And it might surprise you to hear that one of those especially memorable services was lay-led by one of the members of the church I attended in Connecticut. The message began with a description of a harrowing, painful injury that the speaker had sustained, and the agony she experienced having to hold perfectly still for the diagnostic imaging process. I remember her sharing that the only way she found herself able to maintain that patient stillness, despite wanting to scream from pain, was concentrating on a poem by Rumi, The Guest House. She said that she imagined her pain as a guest in her home, and pictured herself hosting it and offering it tea. This determination to embody acceptance rather than resistance in a situation she could not control reduced her physiological stress levels and helped her relax. It's been 11 years since I heard that story, and I still remember how dumbfounded I felt. It's no secret that I struggle with a lot of pain of different sorts, and the idea of welcoming it as a guest was revolutionary to me. I went home and searched the internet until I found the poem, and then I memorized it and added it to my imaginary bag of coping tools. Many of you may be familiar with the Guest House poem already, and perhaps like me, you have found it inspiring without knowing much about its background. Context only paints more beauty into our relationship with an idea, however, so I used this sermon as an impetus to do a little learning. Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi lived in the area which we now know as Afghanistan. He was born in the year 1207. As a young person, he traveled with his family, which led him to study with the scholars and Sufis in Baghdad. Rumi inherited a position at an Islamic theological school from his father and remained there for some years before having a profound encounter with a dervish named Shams. From there, Rumi parted from his celebrated position in society and became an ascetic, forgoing all comforts except the companionship of Shams himself. After the death of his beloved companion, the poet wrote extensively about his love and grief. A transcendental Muslim, Rumi believed powerfully in the unity of all being. Sufism is a mystical, mindfulness-related branch of Islamic belief. So when we think of the guest house, it helps to remember that it was inspired by a life of introspection, a belief in the profound relationship of self with others, and an experiential sense of the presence of Allah in creation. That sense of presence and connection brings me to consider what is missing in the guest house equation. We have the self, the spiritual experience, the presence of the sacred, but what isn't made explicit is our connection with others in the world around us. As we know, our lives are not our own. We are built by our experiences, and so many of those experiences relate to how others have interacted with us. Another way of thinking about this is, if we take Rumi's suggestion and think of the self as a guest house, with emotions visiting and departing within, The guest house didn't appear spontaneously. It's taken on its shape and form, cracks and cornices through the process of innumerable relationships. When we think of this in gratitude, it can be wonderful to remember all the beautiful relationships which have built us. To borrow the words of Mr. Fred Rogers, all of us have special ones who have loved us into being. Would you just take, along with me, 10 seconds to think of the people who have helped you become who you are, those who have cared about you and wanted what was best for you in life? Let's all take those 10 seconds now in honor of Mr. Rogers. Who has built your guest house toward beauty with a stable foundation? Of course, it's not all positive. There are people who enter our lives and wreak havoc. There are relationships that bring out the worst in us, and encounters which leave lifelong wounds. These relationships were also building our guest houses. Perhaps this room has a lock on the door, and perhaps that wall is very thick to keep us safer. Who were the people in your life who have had the biggest impact on the shape of your guest house? Like Shams changed the course of Rumi's life, take a moment to call someone to mind who has built your best self, and try to send them some goodwill. I'm grateful to everyone who contributed to creating the person that you are today. Now take a moment to think about someone who changed your life through the briefest encounter. You may not even know their name, but we've all had those chance meetings which held surprising significance. A conversation at the bus stop which challenged your biases, or the stranger who carried your suitcase up the stairs, or maybe even the purveyor who introduced you to your favorite cheese. If you can call one of these special moments to mind, try sending some goodwill to that person too. Let's send our thoughts to one other person today, someone who has changed you in the past year. 2020 has been an odd one, and although we are physically isolated, none of us has made it through alone. Think of someone who has brought you through to today in some way this year, and send goodwill to them also. The shape of your inner guest house has a big effect on how you personally host your emotional guests. How do you feel about your practices of hosting emotions? Are there things that you wish to improve? Are there ways you could be more welcoming? Perhaps you would like to have better boundaries with your guests and teach them house rules. Maybe they just need some more spaciousness. As we enter into the new year, now is a perfect time to dream up some home improvements. What relationship with your feelings would serve you better this year? In order to make any adjustments we desire for our guest houses, we must consider how it got built that way in the first place. When we understand the cause and effect which created our responses to the world, we can try some methods of fixing what isn't functioning so well and adding on to what we're happiest with. This season, I'm thinking about how to create a connection between what built me in this shape, what is continuing to build and change me, and what I want for the future. I know that tending to my guest house is key to preparing for a future I desire. I also know that when I tend to the deepest core of myself, that's the foundation for preparing myself to go out and work for a better world for everyone. Take some time this week, when your feelings get loud, to picture them as guests in your self-home. Watch them come and go, and take a few notes about what you might like to improve. Let's welcome the new year together by honoring our deep selves and preparing for inner changes to meet the needs of an ever-revolving world.